Thank you for joining our discussion, Jeff.
Thank you, Dan. Glad to be here.
One, it's always amazed me watching you guys pick up track sections and just move them. The first time I think I saw it was actually when they were building the Panama Canal, and they were shifting track around, to do the construction down there and everything. But to see that it's still a going concern, way of pulling maintenance. And then there was also washouts that I saw from several videos of the Outback in Australia that had the same thing. In fact, they had different rail lines that they had to shut down for for decades in some cases to turn around and reconstitute them. But
Yeah, and obviously I didn't want to spend a lot of time on other examples, so we were focusing on the hurricane here. But yeah, there was, obviously serious fires north of Northern California, burning out some major steel bridges maybe 2 years ago. Forgotten now, but in the middle of Nevada, Union Pacific operates from the LA basin through Las Vegas and up to Salt Lake City. There was a horrific flood there that buried their main line under feet of mud for miles. It's probably been 10 or 15 years now, but you can imagine have to get out there with bulldozers and clean all that crud out of the way and then clean the track up because you can't leave dirt all over the track. It'll cause it to deteriorate.
that's what's so baffling about rail. Is you guys are so close knit, and it's so insular that you hear about this stuff afterwards.
Well, it's, the technology, it's easier to rebuild a damaged rail line than a highway, because, even if the ground is undulating, you can pour more ballast, which is the gravel, and straighten it out. Whereas with a highway, you've got to do all kinds of work to get the pavement smooth enough for vehicles to travel over that speed. So,
Well, I get that, and I also get that rail has its own repair capability, which makes it unique, especially from an emergency management standpoint, because you guys are all self-contained. Everybody else is relying on, bringing in all kinds of additional resources from different venues. You guys roll up literally on the track with all of your equipment, and you're in a position to immediately start reconstituting.
some of us are involved in conversations with the Pacific Northwest now because people are saying that there was a horrific earthquake maybe a couple hundred years ago. It was recorded by settlers and so on. And based on the data, they think it could have been something as high as or 9 on the Richter scale, which is pretty awful. I'm not a geologist, but supposedly there's a risk of that happening again at some point, and it'll make the ports unusable there, and that's where a lot of the fuel is brought into some of the Northwest major cities. And what can we do to help? And so I showed them the slide of that locomotive that had been derailed and rolled up the street as just one example of how we could bring in emergency power. Obviously we can bring in large volumes of construction materials, and we can help to haul away a lot of stuff that needs to be gotten rid of and that sort of thing. So,
Well, that was another one that was a trip, because I didn't dawn on me. Yeah, it's diesel electric. It's running. All you got to do is turn around and figure out a way of doing the conversion from 440 over to a 240 or something comparable that would be tied into the city grid. And
I'm not an electrical engineer, but I understand that you cannot run the locomotive at full power because then it will be generating the wrong kind of current. But you can run them at medium speed and still, get a decent amount of energy out of them. You just basically take big fat cables and stick them through the window into the cab equipment locker and hook them up.
I mean, we always thought about, bringing in generators, for major replacement events, and those things are a bear to move over. I mean, you got to get, in California, you got to get Caltrans to turn around and do the heavy equipment approval on the roads.
One thing that I was recommending to people was that if you want to buy large substation equipment, there could be a multi-year lead to get it.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, we are replacing this kinds of equipment from time to time, and rather than scrapping it, maybe we ought to stockpile it somewhere. And I've seen substations on the back of large trucks that, again, I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't know what that means in terms of its capabilities and so on. But you'd think that, portable locomotive generators and these kinds of devices here could be very helpful.
As opposed to being abandoned on some side rail. A few years back, I was looking at the same thing but with fire equipment. We were looking at the whole issue, especially after 9/11, dealing with decontamination in the hospitals. And it was kind of a natural to turn around and take reserve fire rigs and rigging those up with sprinklers. But I never thought about doing it with engines. We've been dancing around the perimeter of rail since about 2004, 2005.
Well, those of us who have toiled in the industry our careers, obviously are proud and aware of what we can do. This could be some kind of a conference, maybe. I'm not involved in the Pacific Northwest conversations very much, so I don't know who and where and when and what they're planning next and all that. But there may be state emergency response people that are having these conversations.
That's the tough part. As far as I know, there really aren't any. I mean, actually, that was kind of a byproduct of this whole this whole project was actually trying to get in contact with rail representatives to turn around and engage in a conversation dealing with emergency management. And it never came to fruition. We could never get anybody to respond back. And yeah, I know you guys have got a tremendous internal capability. I mean, it's, you've got tailored equipment that has evolved over the past 180 years that's so specific to your industry that most people outside of it have no clue that it even exists. So
yeah, even things like snow fighting and down our path, we've got equipment that we don't like to use because it's expensive and limiting, but we've got huge snow plows that have big fans on the front that can blast the snow
yeah,
30 feet to the side or something like that. So,
and the adopted windows that they use for hurricanes on ships, where
oh yeah,
it'll spin and just sling everything off.
yeah. I used to work for Southern Pacific Railroad, who I think might have pioneered that out there. And yeah, they said some Navy guy said, "Why don't you guys use that?" Yeah, that's a great, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's just adapt it from another industry. But the thing with rail is even knowing what you guys do. I mean, that's kind of the sad part about it.
Well, the other thing is the sheer weight of what we can carry. I mean, 286,000 pounds, which is
Yeah,
140 tons, is a standard rail car. But obviously, we can, our locomotives weigh probably the road units weigh probably 200 tons a piece, and we certainly can carry our heavier weights, with preparation and at low speeds and so on. So,
if you have some piece of heavy equipment, you got a D9 Caterpillar that you got to move. It's one of those things, and you've got to move it halfway across a state. Usually you have to turn around and get in contact with the DOT for that state and get special permitting to be able to do that, because they've got to turn around, make sure that the bridges are capable of handling it. You're not going to have any obstructions, all of that stuff. Rail already has that because you have the right of way. And again, the payload on it is way up compared to what a truck can. I mean, a truck can only handle about 70 tons. And
yeah, we also have a 10'6" as our standard width, and we can go wider than that. I get, the thing is, I'm going to say 10, 15 years ago, I was talking to some fire folks, and they were thinking about how they have to platoon lots of equipment and staff, when there's a fire somewhere.
yeah.
And they were thinking, could we do it by rail? And it didn't go very far just because of the logistical challenges. I'm thinking that, we're good at what we do, hauling tons and tons of grain and, commercial goods and all that.
But to be quite honest, a couple of years back, they had the political will when we had to turn around and dispatch a bunch of electrical repair vehicles from the West Coast to the East Coast, and they turned around and used the Air Force to do it. That was a logistical nightmare because the Air Force required those vehicles to be drained of all their fluids before they could, be put on. So, I mean, there's that side of it. But I'm thinking of a three-way conversation that needs to occur somehow. Somebody that has experience moving heavy assets for the military. I mean, when you're talking about an Abrams tank, you're talking about 72 tons combat loaded. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit lighter. It's not going to have the ammo. It's not going to have the ammo, or the fuel on it. But being able to, put one of those onto a flatbed,
we do it. I mean,
we done.
We do handle equipment. I've seen a whole bunch of trucks, military trucks rolling by our building here. We're right next to a main line in DC. And one of my buddies who is retired military, oh yeah, those are going up to some depot for rehaul or, refurbishing or something like that. So yeah, we do that and can do it again. We've got lots of equipment out there.
And the MRAP weighs more than what a truck is going to weigh, at least when you pull the water out of it.
Well, we have specialized flat cars that move full locomotives sometimes, so there's 200 tons right there. So
I hadn't even thought about that. I figured you guys just hooked them up and towed them.
Well, if one has been damaged in an accident, they'll actually put cribbing on the flat car and remove its trucks and just set it down on there and then cable it down. Okay. In other words, it's not safe for operation until it gets repaired.
Having been, not familiar with all the stuff that you've got.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a slam dunk, but it's certainly feasible.
Just the response side of it. Being able to put back trestle bridge, what is that? No, I'm sorry, 7 months? Is that right?
Well, no, the Pontchartrain Bridge was 14 days, and the UP Bridge, I've got it here. It was less than a month.
Oh, okay. No, I thought you said April 8th as far as that one that was being brought back up.
Oh, that one, yeah. Well, that was because obviously there was other things to do there too. I mean, for one thing, the track wasn't passable, so they couldn't bring girders in, and
Yeah, I know it's going to be, it
so
looked like it was going to require a complete redesign of
yeah,
the bridge itself, from the,
yeah. The bridge in Sacramento, the fire was March 15th,
okay.
and it was back in service April 1st. So, one track out of two, so 2 weeks ish. And and as you can see, the bridge was gone. I mean, it was made out of wood, so there was nothing left.
Yeah, but it's having the internal capability to repair your own infrastructure. That's the part that I've always been amazed at with rail, that we haven't turned around and explored it more, because invariably you're going to end up with, I mean, especially when you're talking about Northern California, it really gets hit. You're going to end up with 14 million people basically in gridlock in the Bay Area. And you turn around and you look at the access that rail has in, it's actually clear, of most of the road issues, or it can be cleared, more readily than it can be for the roads. I mean, there are sections of 101 that are built um, on old levees that were put in 120 years ago.
Yeah, those
And
like to
those are just,
liquefy. Yeah.
yeah, they're just going to flatten out and sink. But you turn around and you look at rail, and it's one of those things where, again, if you have the internal capability, it's a matter of approaching it. And in some cases, you can hit it from both ends at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, when they built the Donner route, obviously there was an incentive to build as quickly as possible because you were paid by the mile, and so they actually dragged small tea kettle locomotives by mule up over the pass, and then they had
Yeah.
segments of unattached track being built simultaneously to speed it up. And of
Yeah.
course, the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, remember much of that was fire as opposed to seismic problems. But yeah, the Southern Pacific Railroad, which was headquartered on Market Street at that time, uh, was instrumental in bringing in a lot of relief supplies, for that.
Yep. No, I'm thinking the same thing. It's heavy cargo capability. I mean, even if Moffett Field were up, you're still talking about having to move the supplies up and down and then across the peninsula. You've got rail lines that are already there. It'd be easier to turn around and reconstitute them than what it'd be to, try and bring up 280 even.
Yeah,
So,
there used to be a bridge across the South Bay at Redwood City, and that was freight only. And there's always talk about restoring that in some capacity for transit. But yeah, I mean, aggregate used to come in from Pleasanton to the Bay Area daily. Way back when. A lot of the features that could support that are gone now because there's not so much traffic. I mean, the whole port of San Francisco used to be trains buzzing around, unloading break bulk. That's all gone. Nonetheless, there's plenty of opportunity to bring stuff in.
yeah, no, I just remember the logistics issues with that were brought up with FEMA with the push packages and everything else. Push packages were a holdover from Dunn, Lugar, and Minchie back in the late 1990s. And they have basically a 50 tons worth of emergency supplies that they can turn around and move wherever. One of them's stashed at Moffett Field. But the problem is, again, how do you get it from Moffett Field to where it needs to be? I mean, we even have VTA light rail that could be tapped in for that. And that was never really pushed or explored. I mean, the assumption is that it would simply be pressed into service at time of.
I'll show you a picture from World War II of fueling locomotives by tank car as just an example. I'm not suggesting this is, a great idea, but it shows the capability of fleet. Okay, can you see Albuquerque right there?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What's interesting here, you look at the date and it's 1943, so it's the middle of World War II. The Santa Fe Railroad, which is now part of BNSF, was able to purchase very scarce diesel locomotives at that time because of the challenges of providing water to the steam engines across the Southwest desert.
Okay.
And so This is the Super Chief right here, their premier train that's stopped in Albuquerque for servicing. These engines are probably only 2 or 3 years old. The war is ramping up. There's no time to build a beautiful fueling station there. So they basically brought in tank cars and just hooked them up to hoses. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the exact model we could use to bring tank cars into fuel heavy equipment or trucks, especially because the railroad owns the fuel in the tank cars. So they don't have to meter it. They just dump it in and don't worry about it. But, one could envision some kind of a series of pumps that are on a skid that you could set down and hook them
You
up
know,
and
actually,
fuel.
it's not too far removed that you could do this exact same model all over again. All you need to do is put containment areas around the lines themselves
Yeah,
to turn around and catch this stuff, and and around, and especially around the the fastener points. I mean, where it actually hooks up to the locomotive. But this, from a security standpoint, makes perfect sense, because then you're able to wheel these. Well, one, you're dealing with a greatly reduced volume of fuel, so that immediately brings the threshold of of risk down
yeah,
significantly.
yeah.
But then it's a matter of moving those cars around at will to turn around and put them into the yard where the security would be better than just out where they're at right now. I also like the idea of that rail car behind it, because that's probably for the crew. I mean,
Yeah,
practical necessity.
yeah. In other words, this is just an illustration of the concept. It's not like, here, we'll just do this and we're done. But few fun things. So there's son and father just admiring these brand new locomotives, which are very
Yeah.
rare at that time. And here's the laundry coming out of the sleeping cars to be changed out and so on. But anyway, I'll stop sharing this thing now, but if I can.
No, that is, yeah, no, hidden history,
Yeah.
you know, and it's,
Yeah, but in other words, I can, like somebody I'd say, well, we don't have any storage tanks. What are we gonna, well, you bring the cars in, you hook them up to pumps, and then you hook those pumps up to the vehicles that are being fueled. It's not a
well,
big deal.
well,
It's
name something,
clumsy, but it works.
name something that rail doesn't move. I mean, I'd flip the gears on that. I would turn around and look at it from the opposite end. Because when you think about it, all of the heavy assets that are involved with rail, I mean, everything from the trucks, on up, and then, and of course the track and everything else, you guys bring in. It's not being flown in. It's not, trucking isn't as efficient or effective. So, I mean, not with the volumes that you're talking about. So there's that whole side of it. And fuel, yeah, you guys are moving that every day. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with the market changing, we were running train loads of fuel out of the Bakken, and that's quieted down a bit now. But that illustrates a fairly big ramp up over a relatively short period of time to handling, tons and tons of a commodity that we hardly handled at all a year earlier. That sort of thing.
yeah.
Well, there are regulations not only for containment, but the type of rail car that you can use. If you remember the awful derailment at Lac Megantic, that's 10, 11 years ago now up in Canada, where an oil train ran away and, had a very serious accident. Well, those kinds of cars are now banned from flammable liquid. They all had to be removed from service and replaced by other ones. So, a lot of scrambling around, but it's done.
If I remember correctly, that was a single hole versus double hole issue that came,
Well, it
out on
was
it,
more
or
than that. It was the thickness of the steel in the cars and the
okay.
type of outlets on them. They were called 111s. That's the nomenclature that was fairly common a number of years ago when we were discussing it. DOT 111 cars. So they're still around, but they're no longer handling fuel.
Hmm.
Anyway, there's some food for thought.
Yeah, I know, a lot of food for thought. It's